Just a few hundred yards behind the church grounds, there stood an old, abandoned underground cistern. This large, concrete reservoir had originally been constructed many decades ago to collect and store runoff rainwater. However, as the years passed, it fell out of use and memory, slowly becoming part of the overgrown landscape. Weeds and wild grass crept up around its edges, and a rusted chain-link fence, barely standing in some places, offered little more than a reminder of its presence. After carefully analyzing the confession alongside their own ongoing investigation, law enforcement officials acted swiftly. They made their way to the church property and initiated a thorough search of the grounds. There, they found Summer. Medical examiners were called to the scene immediately. Their task was to evaluate the state and to determine both the cause and the approximate time of death. In the end, the medical findings corroborated much of what had already been revealed in the confession. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Today, in this documentary, we explore the true story of Summer Rae Cook, who was born on December 31, 1985, in the quiet, close-knit town of Logan, Ohio. A place surrounded by thick woods, winding roads, and the type of community where everyone knew everyone else's name. Raised in a large family, Summer was the second of 6 children. Her parents were devoutly religious and active members of their local church, a modest white-steepled building that stood at the heart of town and served as both a spiritual anchor and a social hub for many local families. Growing up, Summer was known as bright, warm-hearted, and approachable. She had a magnetic personality that drew others to her, and it was rare to find someone who had a negative word to say about her. People often described her as someone who made friends effortlessly, with a smile that could light up a room. Even at a young age, she stood out, not for any need to be the center of attention, but because of a certain calm charisma that made her memorable. She was also remarkably well-rounded. In school, she was active in extracurriculars, devoting her time to ballet lessons several nights a week, playing the saxophone in the school's jazz band, and participating in community theater productions at the town's only performance hall. These creative outlets gave her a strong sense of discipline and self-expression. Teachers remembered her as dependable and driven, while her peers simply liked being around her. It was during her teenage years that Summer met William, a boy her age who attended the same church. Though they lived only a few houses apart on the same quiet street, they had never really connected until one particular church youth retreat in their sophomore year. That weekend trip sparked a conversation, which quickly evolved into a connection neither of them had expected. By the time they graduated high school, Summer and William were inseparable, and it wasn't long after graduation that the young couple decided to get married. They began building a life together right there in Logan. Over the next several years, they welcomed 3 beautiful children, 2 daughters followed by a son, who became the center of Summer's world. Family support played a large role in their day-to-day life. They lived only a few houses away from William's parents. His father, a local pastor with a humble construction business on the side, was particularly involved. He often brought the children to church, picked them up from school, and helped with meals and errands when Summer was overwhelmed. At one point, following the offer of a promising construction contract, William's family made the decision to relocate to Florida. They hoped the move would lead to better financial stability and new opportunities. For a while, it seemed like a fresh start. But the reality turned out to be far more difficult than they anticipated. The work dried up, tensions grew, and the challenges of raising 3 young children far from their support system began to take a toll. Within a few years, the family packed up once again and returned to Logan, exhausted, discouraged, but hopeful for a reset. By 2010, Summer made the difficult decision to separate from William and eventually filed for divorce. The breakup wasn't scandalous or dramatic. It was the result of emotional distance, misaligned goals, and years of silent strain. Summer was granted full custody of the children, and she moved back in with her parents, who were more than willing to help with childcare and emotional support. Importantly, because William's family still lived just down the street, he remained a frequent presence in their lives and maintained an active role as a father. At just 25 years old, Summer had a full plate. Her children were only 5, 3, and 2 years old at the time. Every day was a whirlwind of meal prep, story time, diaper changes, and preschool pickups. A full-time job wasn't feasible, so she found part-time work cleaning a local bank branch just 5 minutes from her house. The hours were late, usually starting around 7 p.m. and ending at about 11:20 p.m., but they allowed her to be home with her children during the day. Though her life was busy and often exhausting, Summer never stopped dreaming of a better future. She spoke openly with her family about her plans to return to school. She wanted to pursue a degree, maybe an early childhood education or healthcare, so she could provide a more stable life for her children. Around this time, she also started dating someone new. His name was Adam, and he was a handyman who had been recommended by a neighbor to help fix a leak in her parents' roof. They struck up a friendship that gradually became something deeper. Adam was kind, helpful, and had a steady, calming presence, qualities Summer appreciated more than ever. On the evening of March 22, 2011, Summer clocked in for her usual shift at the bank. That night seemed no different than the dozens of other late shifts she had worked in recent months. She sent Adam a few casual texts during her break, just small updates, checking in about how the kids had done that day and asking him to stop by after her shift. But then, suddenly, the messages stopped. It was just after 11 p.m. At first, Adam wasn't too concerned. Maybe she was just finishing up or got caught in a phone call. But after a few more minutes passed, he sent another message. Then he called. No answer. When 20 minutes went by with no word, he felt a growing sense of unease. Trusting his instincts, he walked the short distance to the bank. When Adam pulled into the dimly lit parking lot just past midnight, something felt unmistakably wrong. The eerie quiet of the lot was unsettling in itself. But what truly made his stomach drop was the sight of Summer's car, still parked in the same spot where she'd left it earlier that day. It was the very same vehicle he had loaned her for work, and seeing it untouched, well past the end of her shift, sent a jolt of unease through him. Summer was known for being dependable, even meticulous. She never lingered after hours without calling, and certainly never left without returning his keys. Driven by concern, Adam stepped out of his car and made his way around to the back of the building. He instinctively took the path leading to the discreet employee entrance, the one Summer used to avoid the main customer doors. That's when he saw them. Objects scattered carelessly behind a large green dumpster. Her iPod with the headphones still tangled, her car keys with the unmistakable purple keychain he had given her, and most disturbingly, parts of her phone. The battery had been separated from the casing, lying several feet away, as if it had been yanked out mid-use or perhaps tossed. His breath caught. This wasn't just concerning. It was terrifying. Adam wasted no time. With shaky hands, he pulled out his phone and called Summer's parents. Within minutes, they arrived, visibly shaken. Her mother recognized the items immediately, her face pale with dread. There was no question. They belonged to Summer. Fearing the worst, her parents called the local police department to report her missing. But to their surprise, the dispatcher's response wasn't what they expected. They were told that their report wasn't the first one received that night concerning the area. Roughly 30 minutes earlier, 2 women out for their routine evening jog had passed by the same bank parking lot. As they neared the far end of the building, they noticed a strange scene unfolding under the flickering glow of a faulty streetlight. A woman, who they later believed to be in her early 20s, was being ushered toward a sedan by 2 individuals. Both were dressed entirely in black, and their faces were obscured by ski masks, making them instantly suspicious. Initially, the joggers hesitated, unsure whether this was a dangerous situation or simply a misunderstanding. But then something stranger happened. A third figure, another woman, emerged from the back seat of the vehicle. Unlike the masked pair, she wore civilian clothing, and her demeanor was calm, almost rehearsed. She intercepted a bystander who had been approaching the scene, perhaps intending to intervene. The joggers recalled how this woman seemed to subtly but firmly dissuade the passerby, gesturing as if everything was fine. The interaction was brief but unsettling. Moments later, the woman returned to the car and the vehicle took off quickly, its tires squealing as it disappeared into the night with all 3 passengers inside. The joggers, now deeply alarmed, rushed the last few blocks to the nearest police station. Though winded and anxious, they immediately reported what they had witnessed, hoping authorities would spring into action. Despite the joggers' urgent tone and detailed account, the officers downplayed the situation. They suggested it might have been a domestic misunderstanding or a dramatized encounter misread from afar. Even after hearing about the ski masks and the strange exchange with the bystander, the officers didn't seem moved to act quickly. They gave an explanation. Most of the active patrol units were tied up responding to other issues, such as routine traffic stops or neighborhood disturbances. No unit could be dispatched to the bank at that moment, they said. Disappointed but unwilling to stand by, the joggers decided to go back on their own. They retrieved a vehicle and returned to the location about 20 minutes later, clinging to the hope that police would already be on the scene. But when they arrived, what they found shocked them more than what they had seen earlier. Summer's car was still in the same spot. The items behind the dumpster remained exactly where Adam had discovered them, untouched, unexamined, and without any sign of investigation. There were no flashing lights, no officers canvassing the area, no perimeter tape marking off the scene. The entire parking lot was just as it had been, as though no one had ever called the police at all. Feeling both helpless and responsible, the 2 women chose to stay. They couldn't shake the feeling that what they had seen was serious, and they didn't want to leave the scene unmonitored. Nearly an hour had passed since their original report, and still no law enforcement had shown up. Frustrated, one of the joggers called her husband, explaining the growing concern. The husband, equally disturbed by the unfolding situation, made a second call to the police department, this time demanding someone be sent immediately. Finally, more than an hour after the first report, law enforcement arrived at the scene. The police began questioning witnesses, but no one cordoned off the area or made any effort to preserve the crime scene. It wasn't until the runner's husband arrived in person and started asking the officers pointed questions that things began to change. Once investigators began actively piecing together the timeline, the puzzle started to take shape. Based on what the joggers had seen, combined with the personal belongings Adam and Summer's parents had identified, it was becoming increasingly clear that the woman taken was likely Summer. Her phone had ceased all activity shortly after 11 p.m., a digital silence that only added to the weight of the evidence. Her scattered possessions near the bank's employee entrance painted a troubling picture, suggesting something had occurred suddenly, but with clear intent. As officers finally began canvassing the area for security footage and interviewing witnesses, the urgency of the situation became undeniable. Witnesses provided law enforcement with a description of the vehicle involved in the abduction: a white, older model sedan with no visible license plate and tinted windows. The car had fled the scene in a hurry. An alert was issued for the vehicle, and police began working to contact those closest to Summer, hoping someone might have useful information. When officers visited Summer's parents, they quickly learned that her past was filled with tension, particularly surrounding her relationship with her ex-husband, William. According to her parents, the marriage had been rocky from the beginning. William was known for having a rigid and authoritarian outlook, one that he justified through his personal interpretation of religious doctrine. As soon as they married, Summer said she noticed a troubling shift in his behavior. William demanded absolute loyalty and obedience, restricting who Summer could talk to and forbidding her from spending time with even close friends or extended family without his permission. He expected her to maintain a spotless home, have dinner prepared at a precise time, and adhere to his increasingly specific expectations of how a wife should behave. He took control of the household finances and discouraged her from working outside the home. As time went on, William's beliefs took an even more extreme turn. He expressed a desire to take a second wife. Despite the fact that polygamy is not recognized by law, he justified this aspiration with his religious views. Summer was shocked and deeply uncomfortable with the idea. To her, the marriage was supposed to be a partnership, not a system of control. But William persisted, and his request became more than just philosophical. He expected her to go along with it. In addition to this, William wanted to expand their family drastically. He asked that Summer give him 9 more children on top of the 3 they already had. He reportedly took away her phone at times, monitored her movements, and even kept her from leaving the house without him. Eventually, she reached a breaking point and filed for divorce. But even after the legal separation was finalized, the hostility did not end. In fact, it escalated. William, along with his parents, responded to the divorce with intense opposition. He began pursuing full custody of their children, insisting that Summer was unfit to raise them on her own. When he discovered that she had begun a new relationship with a man named Adam, whom he already knew, it pushed things further. What really set him off was a photo posted online, a simple image of Adam with Summer and the kids. That public glimpse into her new life enraged William. In court, he fought to regain custody, but his behavior worked against him. Judges reviewed the testimony, the history of control, and the reports of intimidation. In the end, the decision favored Summer. She was granted full custody, and William's visitation was limited. That only fueled further resentment. William's parents began making complaints, repeatedly contacting authorities with various allegations aimed at Adam, accusing him of everything from neglect to misconduct. Yet none of their claims held up under investigation. Detectives looked into the reports and found no evidence supporting them. During the complex and often frustrating investigation into Summer's sudden and unexplained disappearance, authorities found themselves delving far deeper than initially expected. Their focus expanded beyond William, Summer's ex-husband, and turned toward his immediate family, particularly his father, whose history and actions began raising more and more questions. Roughly 1 year before Summer went missing, William's father had stepped into the public eye with what initially appeared to be an ambitious and noble endeavor. He formally announced the founding of his own church, presenting himself as a spiritual leader with a mission rooted in service and compassion. Alongside this announcement, he registered a nonprofit organization. The stated aim of this newly formed charity was clear and commendable: to aid members of the community who were experiencing homelessness by providing affordable housing solutions. On paper, the initiative was inspiring. It garnered attention quickly, especially within the local faith-based community. Many people rallied behind the cause, eager to support what seemed like a sincere effort to bring positive change. William's father began attending community events and church meetings, spreading the word and handing out specially designed lottery tickets, which were touted as a creative fundraising mechanism. These tickets were custom printed and sold at gatherings, and the proceeds were promised to go toward building modest, sustainable housing units for those most in need. However, as time went on, optimism began to fade. Despite the significant donations, police would later estimate the total to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was no sign of progress. No land was surveyed or purchased, no building permits were filed, and not a single foundation was laid. The public, initially patient and trusting, started to grow uneasy. When concerned donors began asking about updates or outcomes, they were met with vague, often contradictory explanations. At first, William's father claimed there were delays with the city's planning department. Then it was an issue with zoning regulations. Eventually, he stopped responding to inquiries entirely. The nonprofit quietly dissolved, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions, frustrated donors, and deepening suspicion. Adding to the growing unease was another troubling development. Around the same time that his charity efforts unraveled, William's father lost his pastoral credentials. Although the exact reasons for the revocation were never made public, it became one more red flag in a mounting list of controversies surrounding him. For those who had supported him, financially or spiritually, the betrayal felt personal. This period also marked a serious downturn for the family as a whole. Just a few short months before Summer disappeared, William's household faced a major financial setback. They were evicted from their home after failing to meet several mortgage payments. Forced to relocate, the family left behind a property filled with belongings and memories, some cherished, others far more painful. It was during this difficult chapter that Summer returned to the house, accompanied by her friend Adam. Her goal was simple: to collect the last of her personal items before they were lost or discarded. Despite the fact that she had once lived there, Summer was deeply uneasy about stepping foot on the property again. Though it now legally belonged to William's parents, it remained a place heavy with emotional baggage. Years of tension, control, and manipulation had left scars that were not easily forgotten. Hoping to avoid any conflict, Summer did the responsible thing. She requested a police officer be present while she gathered her things. Adam came along to assist with the physical labor, helping her carry boxes and load the vehicle. But the situation turned volatile almost immediately. William's father became visibly hostile the moment he saw Adam. His demeanor changed instantly, his voice rising in anger as he accused Adam of trespassing. Though a uniformed officer was standing by, trying to maintain peace, the elder man's agitation quickly escalated. He shouted accusations, ignored repeated warnings, and continued to challenge the presence of both Summer and Adam. The officer, remaining calm and professional, attempted to mediate. But when William's father refused to comply with lawful directives and continued his disruptive behavior, the situation left him no choice. He was arrested at the scene and charged with disorderly conduct. While no one was physically harmed, the incident underscored just how tense and unstable the family dynamic had become. A judge later issued a suspended sentence. This wasn't just another family dispute. It was part of a larger, darker narrative. As investigators dug deeper into Summer's disappearance, they turned their attention to the intricate web of relationships and psychological patterns within William's family. They reviewed communication records, financial statements, and, most revealingly, Summer's personal journal, something her parents had found and handed over in a desperate effort to help uncover the truth. The journal entries were illuminating. Written in private, they were emotionally raw and painfully honest. Summer described her life during her marriage to William. She felt isolated and surveilled, with little control over daily decisions. Even basic choices, like what to cook or where to take the children, required William's approval. Over time, her confidence eroded, replaced by a quiet sadness, and eventually, a fierce resolve. One particular entry stood out to detectives. In it, Summer wrote of a turning point. The moment she realized she could no longer endure the environment she was in, and that her children deserved a more peaceful, nurturing life. She acknowledged the overwhelming fear of leaving, but also the deep sense of purpose that guided her choice. Beyond her words, investigators began to piece together more elements of the family's complex emotional history. After William was born, his mother experienced a series of medical complications that left her unable to have more children. Friends and relatives later described how that loss seemed to transform her outlook and behavior. Over time, her attachment to William's children became all-consuming. She often told people in the community that if anything ever happened to William or Summer, she would raise the children herself, not as a guardian, but as their true mother. This level of attachment began to raise red flags. Acting on a series of witness statements and mounting evidence, the police visited William's residence, the home he shared with his parents. One critical piece of information had come from witnesses the night Summer vanished: a description of the getaway car, a white sedan with distinct features. During their visit, detectives noted that a vehicle matching that exact description was parked in the driveway. William, when questioned at the scene, maintained his innocence. He stated that on the night of Summer's disappearance, he and his parents had taken a trip out of town, specifically to Cleveland, roughly 3 hours away, to look at investment properties. He claimed their car broke down during the return trip, forcing them to spend the night and return the next morning. Both of his parents echoed the story, offering identical timelines and accounts of the supposed breakdown. But investigators weren't satisfied. The story felt rehearsed, and with so much at stake, they knew they had to dig deeper. A search warrant was quickly obtained, allowing police to examine both the vehicle and the home more thoroughly. Inside the house, investigators found a portable GPS navigation system. It had not been used in some time, but detectives knew that even powered-off devices often retained historical data. They handed the unit over to forensic specialists, who extracted a detailed log of location points. What they found didn't support William's story. It contradicted it entirely. According to the GPS records, the last location logged before the device was turned off at approximately 5:30 p.m. on the day of Summer's disappearance was not Cleveland, but Logan. More specifically, near the bank where Summer worked. The GPS wasn't turned on again until early the following morning, around 7:30 a.m., and its first recorded location at that time was a local car wash. Surveillance footage from that car wash told investigators even more. Video showed all three family members, William, his mother, and his father, scrubbing the vehicle meticulously. They were seen vacuuming the seats, wiping down the dashboard, and even removing and replacing the tires. The behavior struck detectives as deliberate and overly cautious. By the time law enforcement had reviewed the footage and matched it with the GPS data, 8 critical days had passed since Summer was last seen. With the timeline in place and the Cleveland alibi discredited, investigators brought William and his parents in for questioning. The two men remained firm in their denials. They claimed the GPS must have been malfunctioning and insisted the trip had happened just as they'd said. But when detectives turned to William's mother, something unexpected occurred. Without much prompting, she broke down and began to speak. In a quiet but emotionally loaded voice, she confessed that Summer was no longer alive. She did not provide specific details about how it happened, but what she did share sent a chill through the room. According to her, the family had grown increasingly distraught after the court ruled in Summer's favor regarding custody. Despite repeated attempts to convince her otherwise, Summer had remained firm. She would not allow unsupervised visits, and she no longer trusted William or his parents with the children. In their frustration, the family devised a plan to confront Summer in person. But something went wrong. At some point during the encounter, Summer began to appear physically unwell. William and his father, unprepared and panicked, didn't know what to do. They made no call for help, took no steps to get medical assistance, and instead focused on covering their tracks. In her statement, William's mother described it as a tragic accident, the result of a situation that spiraled out of their control. But to detectives, it was something much more serious. After the incident, William and his parents drove toward the nearest town, a familiar place to them, not just geographically, but emotionally. It was where William's parents had long attended church services, held community events, and maintained ties with friends and congregants. This wasn't just a place on the map, it was a location they felt connected to, and investigators would later question whether the familiarity played into their choice. Nearby, just a few hundred yards from the back of the church property, was an old, disused underground cistern, a large concrete structure originally built decades ago to store runoff water. Over time, it had become a forgotten fixture of the land, surrounded by weeds and partially concealed by a rusting chain-link fence. To someone unfamiliar with the area, it may have gone unnoticed entirely. But to the family, it would have been something they'd seen countless times over the years. It was there, according to William's mother, that they decided to leave Summer. Her claim was that their intention had never been to cause her harm. However, the sequence of events that followed, including the rapid attempt to hide what had occurred, cast serious doubt on that narrative. Investigators found it difficult to believe that a simple confrontation had turned tragic without any premeditation, especially considering the emotional volatility that had been building for months. William's prior threats, many of which had been reported during the custody proceedings, painted a very different picture. He had openly told friends, family members, and even church acquaintances that he would never let someone take his kids away, no matter what a court said. After piecing together the confession with their own leads, law enforcement moved quickly. They arrived at the church grounds and conducted a search of the property. Not long after, they discovered Summers inside, exactly where William's mother had said she would be. Medical examiners were immediately brought in to assess the condition and determine the cause and time of death. The medical report confirmed much of what the confession described. Summer was no longer seen just 45 minutes after she went missing, a detail that deeply concerned investigators. It indicated there may have been a brief opportunity to intervene. All three family members, William, his father, and his mother, were arrested shortly. The charges were serious: premeditated murder, conspiracy, and obstruction. Their arrests sent a wave of shock through the community. Despite their known tension with Summer, few had expected the situation to escalate to such a devastating level. The legal proceedings began quickly, and yet, not every part of the justice process sat well with the public, particularly the decision to offer a plea bargain to William's mother. In exchange for her confession and for leading investigators to Summer's location, prosecutors agreed to reduce the severity of her charges. She also provided testimony in court, reiterating her version of events and emphasizing that she had not intended for things to turn out the way they did. The court accepted the plea deal, and William's mother, Sandra Inman, was sentenced to just 15 years in prison. With good behavior, it's possible she could be released even earlier. A detail that left Summer's family feeling a mix of grief and frustration. To them, the sentence seemed painfully short compared to the lifelong loss they had endured. William Inman and his father, by contrast, were both convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court viewed their involvement as active, premeditated, and central to the events that led to Summer's death. Witness statements, GPS records, surveillance footage, and their repeated lies during questioning all contributed to the decision. In the aftermath of the trial, Summer's three children were placed in the care of her parents. The oldest child, who had started school shortly before the tragedy, posed a unique challenge. The story had been widely covered in Logan. It was impossible to shield him entirely from overheard conversations, whispered comments from classmates, or even well-meaning strangers who approached to offer their sympathies. Summer's parents began to worry that the children's last name would forever tie them to a crime they had no part in. They quietly explored the possibility of legally changing their surnames, hoping to give the children a fresh start, free from the weight of association and public scrutiny. As the years passed, Summer's children grew up under the loving, protective care of their maternal grandparents. The family made a conscious decision to remain private, avoiding media attention and public commentary. They moved away from Logan eventually, settling in a different town where the children could have a new beginning. As for William's mother, she remains incarcerated but is scheduled for possible release in 2028. Legal experts have debated whether she will be allowed any contact with her grandchildren after her release.